Today, we're taking a deep dive into one of the most dramatic events in British royal history, the abdication crisis of King Edward VIII. Imagine giving up the throne for love. That's exactly what Edward VIII did for Wallis Simpson, an American divorcee. His decision shook the monarchy to its core, causing a national and political crisis. The abdication crisis of 1936 remains one of the most extraordinary and emotionally charged moments in British royal history. Edward VIII's decision to abandon the throne for love, a choice that would alter the trajectory of the British monarchy, brought centuries-old traditions into conflict with a rapidly modernizing world. While much of the attention is often focused on the romance between Edward and Wallis Simpson, the crisis itself was far more than just a love story. It was a dramatic clash of duty, politics, societal norms, and public expectations. Here, we examine this historic event in greater depth to understand its significance and the lasting impact it left on the monarchy. Edward VIII, a modern royal in a traditional role. Edward VIII, born in 1894, was an unconventional royal. From a young age, he showed little inclination to conform to the rigid expectations placed upon a future king. As Prince of Wales, he embraced the modernity of the early 20th century, becoming a symbol of hope and progress for the British people. His charm and charisma made him highly popular, and he enjoyed an international celebrity status, frequently appearing in newspapers and newsreels. However, Edward's personal lifestyle, marked by affairs with married women, lavish parties, and a carefree attitude, alarmed many within royal and political circles. For Edward, the traditional responsibilities of a monarch often clashed with his desire to live a more relaxed and self-directed life. He was critical of many of the formalities and constraints of royal duty, and by the time he ascended to the throne in January 1936, it became clear that his reign would be marked by a more hands-off approach. Nevertheless, few could have anticipated just how short his reign would be, or how dramatically it would end. The forbidden love, Wallis Simpson and Edward VIII. The heart of the abdication crisis lies in Edward's relationship with Wallis Simpson, a twice-divorced American socialite. Their love affair was scandalous, not just because Wallis was already married when their relationship began, but because of the prevailing social and moral attitudes of the time. Divorce was still heavily stigmatized in British society, especially for someone in the public eye, let alone the reigning monarch. For a king, as head of the Church of England, a church that did not permit remarriage after divorce, while the former spouse was still living, Wallis was seen as entirely unsuitable for royal life. Edward, however, was undeterred by societal and religious conventions. He was deeply in love with Wallis and determined to make her his queen, despite the strong opposition from the royal family, the British government, and the Church of England. Wallis, too, was aware of the unprecedented position she was in, expressing concerns about the public backlash and the challenges that lay ahead. Behind the scenes, Wallis became a deeply polarizing figure, with many in royal circles viewing her as a social climber and an unsuitable match for the king. Edward's insistence on marrying her regardless of public opinion placed him in direct conflict with the British establishment. Wallis herself sought refuge in France during the height of the crisis, waiting for Edward's decision on whether he would choose her or the throne. The political ramifications. The abdication crisis was not just a personal dilemma for Edward VIII, it was a constitutional crisis that put the stability of the British government at risk. Prime Minister Stanley Baldwin, along with many political leaders, saw the king's proposed marriage as a threat to the monarchy's integrity and the wider British Empire. As a constitutional monarch, Edward was expected to reign in accordance with the advice of his government and remain politically neutral. By insisting on marrying Wallis, Edward was effectively forcing his government into a difficult position. Baldwin made it clear that the government could not support the marriage, as it would undermine the moral authority of the monarchy and set a dangerous precedent. More importantly, Baldwin feared that the marriage would alienate other parts of the British Empire, particularly the dominions like Canada, Australia, and South Africa, where conservative social values were strongly held. The British public was largely kept in the dark during the initial stages of the crisis, the press in the UK adhering to a self-imposed code of silence when it came to the royal family's personal affairs, refrained from reporting on Edward's relationship with Wallis. However, international media, especially in the United States, openly discussed the scandal, and the story eventually made its way into British households. Edward's abdication, a shocking decision. On December 11, 1936, Edward VIII made history by becoming the first British monarch to voluntarily abdicate the throne. In his emotional broadcast, Edward famously said, "I have found it impossible to carry the heavy burden of responsibility and to discharge my duties as king as I would wish to do, without the help and support of the woman I love." The abdication sent shockwaves through Britain and the Commonwealth. Edward's decision to place personal happiness above his royal responsibilities was unprecedented, and for many, it was a betrayal of the monarchy's duty to the country. Edward's younger brother, Albert, Duke of York, was suddenly thrust into the spotlight as the new monarch, becoming King George VI. Unlike Edward, George VI was a more reserved and traditional figure, and his reign would come to symbolize stability and duty, particularly during the tumultuous years of World War II. Edward was granted the title Duke of Windsor and lived much of his life in exile. He married Wallis Simpson in a private ceremony in France in June 1937, but the couple's relationship with the rest of the royal family remained strained for decades. They were largely excluded from royal life, with Edward's abdication leaving a permanent rift between him and his family. Public and media reactions. The public reaction to the abdication crisis was mixed. While Edward had been a popular figure, many were disappointed by his decision to step down. The British media, which had long shielded the royal family from intrusive coverage, turned a critical eye on Edward's abdication, with some portraying Wallis as the villain who had driven a wedge between the king and his country. Others, however, admired Edward for following his heart, viewing his decision as a bold statement of personal freedom. His abdication was often romanticized in later years as a love story that transcended royal duty, though this view tended to overlook the wider consequences of his actions on the monarchy and the country. The impact on the monarchy. The abdication crisis had profound consequences for the British monarchy. Edward's abdication forced the royal family to reassess its role and image in British society. King George VI and his wife, Queen Elizabeth, later the Queen Mother, worked tirelessly to restore public confidence in the monarchy. George VI's steady leadership during World War II and his emphasis on family values helped rebuild the monarchy's reputation, setting the stage for the long and successful reign of Queen Elizabeth II. Moreover, the crisis cemented the idea that the monarchy must remain above personal desires and public scandals. It underscored the importance of maintaining a clear separation between the personal and public lives of the royal family. The lessons learned from the abdication crisis would shape how future monarchs approach their roles, with a renewed emphasis on duty, service, and stability. Thanks for joining me on this journey through the abdication crisis. What do you think? Was Edward's decision to choose love over the crown admirable, or did he abandon his duty to the country? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to give it a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe for more stories from royal history. Until next time, stay curious and take care.